Welcome to the Mastering the Game of Allyship group call. Yet unnamed, will be unnamed for always because I really like ramping and vamping on this bit that I never seem to resolve. It's got big who's line anyway energy. Yeah, so today we're just going to do our normal thing where we sort of break down what showed up for us in the work. It's totally fine if you're at different places. In fact, sometimes it's a lot better. The students who are further can kind of give advice to how it helped them sort of get through some of the stickier spots, the village, raising the children, all this good stuff. I will start. This week, if you are all the way caught up, was the sort of Fungineer week, and it's not finished. Just the way that the weeks have sort of shut out. Like the third day ends on Friday, and I've decided to take these weekends. But it really sort of called me into the awareness of just like, yeah, I can abstractly bring in this idea of fun. And I can even create safe structures for people to really sort of explore it. But it was making me realize that as much as I was pushing this concept of fun into the world and destigmatizing it and all this stuff, that I wasn't embodying it in such a way in which it was easy. Like that the part of me that was resisting it was just like, making things fun is work. I'm like, what? What a weird way to like get that cut. Like, okay, what if we like didn't? And constantly being like aware of the fact that even trying to make that a thing, giving people permission to do it, I'm still bringing my own stank of this must be hard and difficult and strange to surmount. And it is in its own way, but like I was feeling less like a fun board game and more like a great horrible burden. And so that was something that really came up for me and kind of showed, at least in my life, that that's big blue amber energy for me. It's like, these are the rules. This is what you're supposed to do. Anytime that you're supposed to bring fun into the world, it has to be, you have to spend a pint of blood to get it. And I'm just like, I don't know, man, I don't want it. And then seeing people have more fun than I was even making the thing, I'm just like, I mean, that's great, but also like, oh no, that's making me realize that like, there is an easier, more fun, enjoyable way to even invite people sort of into that space. And that was kind of a cool way to play around in. So yeah, that was me. I don't know if anyone has any response to that before we go on to the next person.
I think it's funny that you mentioned like the dungeon master stuff. My husband recently asked me if I wanted to do dungeon mastering. I've never done it before, and I told him no because it seemed like it'll suck all the fun out and turn it into homework. So not helpful advice, but it just what you were saying reminded me of it.
That's huge. I occasionally will mentor dungeon masters because like that's one of the things that they have to really work on the most is that like dungeon masters has fun at the expense of their players and like don't do that. That's boring and really irritating and kind of low-key abusive. But then the opposite will happen where it's like, oh cool, only my players are allowed to have fun and I have to be careful. I'm like, awful too. Got to be able to do both. The practice is figuring out how to do both. And I guess even hearing that, it's like, yeah, that homework feeling is just like, no, I'm electing to be in this play space and create this for people. How do I bring the fun thing? What challenges would I like to see versus the challenges that maybe I've promised, especially as this is an experimental structure. I know that the structure works, and yet my weird little chaos demon is just like, what if I just fucking threw something weird or new or zany at it? And I'm just like, but they didn't sign up for that. It's just like, well, just at least have the idea come out so you can see it and then make an assessment about it before just being like, nope, gotta stay in my lane and have everything boxed and okay.
I've been thinking, I relate to this a lot. I've been thinking about it a great deal in terms of like how we situate ourselves in online spaces, especially as authorities on certain things or as like guides. And what happens if you assume a guide role, does that automatically mean that you're ostracized from any sort of permission to make mistakes, any sort of permission to change your opinion, any sort of permission to goof off, right? Or like not have all of the answers. And I still don't have a clear read on, I'm trying to be really mindful about complimenting it in other people when I see it, because that forms a roadmap, right? But I think personally, I'm still trying to toy with how to strike that balance, because I feel like currently it's either I am in a public space feeling like I need to have all the answers, or I'm taking all my toys and going home and like playing and experimenting in the privacy of my own space and like doing my own work and doing it quietly, but missing out on whatever benefit might be had from sharing that with other people and helping them understand that it is okay. Like I'm not practicing what I'm preaching in the quiet of my own home, and trying to just like find that balance between, you know, how much of this needs to be externalized and how much of it is valuable to do internally, especially in a culture where we're encouraged to just like share everything all the time and be the star of your own reality show.
See, I feel like I get a lot of pushback when I try to introduce fun into certain areas to where fun is not accepted. There's a current reflection I'm having in my life right now of where there are people who are like, well, hey, we need to do things that are fun. And I was just like, okay, I need you to open up and try some stuff with me then if we're going to do things that are fun. Like, I keep introducing you to new ideas. And especially in like the race area, there's a lot of concepts I've been playing with, as well as kind of in the sexism area too for me personally, that I do think kind of make the idea fun. Like, I recently rewatched The Devil's Advocate, and I just forgot how much sometimes a good debate can be really great. But I kind of get pushback from that. It's like there's this level of seriousness, like that you have to be this serious about this topic all the time. And I'm not talking about so far as making jokes of things, but okay, maybe yes, sometimes making jokes of things, but also just kind of appreciating the absurdity. My famous example right now is Scam Goddess. I love that podcast. I love Lacey Mosley. Her last guest is one of my favorite people because he's just a giant freaking troll. And she talks about some pretty interesting things on there, but it's very, oh, well, you can't joke about true crime. Oh, these people suffered. You know, you can't admire a scam artist. And I'm like, but why though?
Is the show called Scam Goddess?
Scam Goddess, Lacey Mosley. She's awesome. Oh, awesome. It's a podcast.
But why though is the big question. It does feel like there is a ceiling and there are rules, and that one of the things that comes up, fantastic book, highly recommend it, Finite and Infinite Games. And I think I even bring this up in like the earlier things, but if it's like, if you're forced to play, you can't play. So even if there are like a series of rules, if you are forced to do it, that's just prison. And the literal mindset shift of being like, how do I create a space of choice, does it. And the only people who've exercised that choice that we've seen are these deviant scammers. These, I have elected to do not this. But what does it look like to, I mean, I guess to put a bow on it, like if we had relationship with our inner trickster scammers, then at least we could be aware internally of our choice, be like, I could be this person who is real and not a cartoon and actually would take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps. I'm choosing not to because I'm playing this game. And I wonder if that changes the energy, because that's the thing too, is that like, I don't know, again, there's an episode of Community where Abed builds the pillow fort, and then when it finally like doesn't meet his like sort of quality, he's just like, well, let's destroy the whole thing. And so much of it like has this like sense of tragedy, but part of me goes, yeah, no, that's what you do in that situation. That's great. Abed doesn't feel bad about it. This is the situation. I'm just like, yeah. There's a part of me that's just, I wish I had the freedom to be able to do that. And it's like, well, you do. You could do it at any given moment. You could just say like, sorry guys, I hope you got value out of this. I'm not doing this anymore. This is terrible and awful. And I could do it. I don't want to do it because it's not terrible. It's a great time and it's enjoyable, but it feels like I have to go there to even recognize the positive space that I do have. And I wonder if it's like, that's the thing that like society pushes us against, where it's like, nope, it has to be all enjoyable or all miserable, and that you can't play around with like the dichotomies at all. Like, I think that that's something that I really enjoy, is playing with extremes to find not even the middle, but like my middle. Just like, okay, if there's this pole, I'm somewhere on here, but I'll only know that by like sifting sand back and forth until I see what part of me emerges, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's where I was. And that feels playful to me in a way that might feel Sisyphean to other people.
I was going to say, like, types of play may shift according to user.
Yeah, it's like whoever steps into the space is going to have a different, it makes me think about like social practice art, which is sort of, you know, school of creation that's very much dependent on how an audience engages with a work of art. There's like some sort of interactive component maybe, or some sort of like community oriented practice. And you like don't know if you build, my thesis advisor did a piece where he built like a literal soapbox out of bars of soap. And then people in the gallery were invited to stand on top of the box of soap, the soapbox of soap. And there was a prompt that you were supposed to talk about a time when you realized that it wasn't all about you, but like while standing on the soapbox in the middle of the art. But I really like, I love the concept of that because you just like, you don't know what people are going to do. They might get up there and like, there's just no way to tell. And Wendell, the thing you were talking about, the community episode of like burning everything down if it's not fitting your notion, or like being willing to destroy your own idols or your own edifices of success. Milton Glaser passed away last week. It's this very famous graphic designer who did the I Heart New York logo, among many, many other things. And there was an interview with him that I was rewatching that made me think of your course. He says, in professional life, you must discover a kind of identity for yourself. That becomes a sort of trademark, a way of working that is distinctive that people can recognize. The reason for this is that the path to financial success and notoriety is by having something that no one else has. The personal model, or the model for personal development, therefore, is antithetical to the model for professional success. And he talks about this like at great length of how success in our culture is often defined as like, you do a thing, you do it well, you do it uniquely enough that people then just know you for doing that thing. They ask you to do that thing more. You have to do that thing ad nauseum until you lose interest in it. And then you probably have to keep doing it if you want to keep making a living. And like, that is the definition of stuckness, right? It doesn't leave any room for the kind of development that we're exploring in this course, or a sense of play, or a willingness to just start over and return to being a student, of like cycling in and out of master-student relationship all the time. And just hearing that like articulated, especially the last bit, that the model for personal development is antithetical to the model for professional success, is just like, yeah, I'm feeling divergent.
No, this is good. I want to put a pin on this, and then I'll just be real. You're next, Lucy. I see there's something bubbling under the surface. But like, yeah, this aspect, because I think this ties directly to like allyship. Like, this is something I've sort of tried to bring in very surreptitiously, but I think it's okay to let the cat out of the bag. Allyship as craft. Like, I'm just over it as this thing that people, as penance, as religion, as whatever you want to call it. I'm like, allyship as craft. Well, how would you create a creative practice? You would go through these identity shifts and do all of this stuff. And so this line of professional success and personal development being like oppositional is really interesting, because I do know that there are quadrants in which high levels of development do lead to success, and it seems like there's like a hidden vector that creates an intersection between those. And I'm curious, from an allyship standpoint, and maybe this is just something I put in my back burner, but like, what is that intersection for allyship of success and high levels of development? I don't know, but like, that immediately was just like, I would like somehow for that to get answered in this container. I don't know how, but I'm going to chew on it for a while. But I'm just passing the torch. That was my question. What is happening with you this week in the work, Lucy?
Oh, shit. So having, much like Mindy, I had a week of not being able to keep up. I just watched the video for day 14 this morning. Something I've noticed, just like starting to move into more of this juxtaposition of the 3-2-1s we've already been doing on our ideal ally solves, and then pairing that with developmental levels. I think moving into that round table exercise has been really interesting and cool, because I'm noticing that there is conversation, even if the characters, like, sometimes I think you suggested in the video this morning, certainly, that the green developmental level and the ideal ally hero probably have some commonality. And that hasn't always been true for every exercise. Sometimes the developmental level and the aspect that I'm exploring that day are really different, but there is always something in conversation between the two of them. And with the developmental level stuff, I have definitely been struck by how much I'm going back to different points in my own life. And this is something that I think I've seen people talk about this in the Facebook group, that like, there is this tension between just wanting to elucidate different parts of yourself, where like every character looks like you and is just kind of a version of you. And I think at some point you would even counsel people to like push it, you know, rather than trying to just draw yourself over and over again, but you're changing your hair length or whatever. You're like really saying like, this part of me is an enormous dragon person with like flames for eyes, and you got to really like push the extraneous stuff out of the way. And I've tried some of that, and I think it has been cool and fruitful. But certainly in the developmental levels, I find myself going back more to this sense of like, okay, who was I in high school? and how can I dial that up to make it more of a caricature while still re-entering the headspace of what it was like to be, you know, a straight A student, or to be like really fixated on following the rules, or to go to, you know, this school that didn't have a lot of had a lot of good intentions in its curriculum, but didn't have a lot of like student body diversity to back that up. And what did it feel like to be inside a system that was claiming to be progressive without being able to articulate like why it wasn't really working. So yeah, I'm really enjoying the conversations between the developmental levels. This is something that maybe can be solved by some investigation online, but I'm also curious to hear a little bit about like where this framework comes from, the developmental level thing, because I see a lot of people referencing it when I had gone Googling around. But I'm curious about like how it came into your world, Wendell, and what your understanding is of like the lineage of it, because it seems like there are different like epistemologies, I guess, that use it in different ways, and they have different names for everything. But that's a meta question that we can do some other time.
I won't do this second, but it's a very fun conversation just because the academic in me, it's basically academia. Like the easiest answer you could say it's always existed everywhere. And then some weirdos started paying attention to it in these different fields. And then one super weirdo was like, you guys are doing the same thing. And then lumped them all together. That's the SparkNotes version of it. But yeah, really just everyone looking at the different parts of the elephant. Just like, I found the tail, I found the trunk, I found the rough bits. Is the simplest version of it. Yeah, so I can circle back to that, but I'm curious if there's anything, I guess more on the ground that you'd want to sort of play around with, or like places of like sort of stuckness, or places of like weird attraction, but like basically sort of ferreting out like any resistances. This is a great place to clear those in community and conversation.
Yeah, the stucknesses I'm feeling, I talked before we started recording about how I've been dealing with like breakup emotional baggage this week, and like personal emotional trauma that is unrelated to this work. And I would love to talk about, I think there's a pressure in our lives, and maybe this goes back to our discussion around divorcing play and justice work, that there's a sense of like, well, your personal emotional life is irrelevant when addressing this work that we're doing in this container. And I'm noticing a desire in myself to discount whatever relationship those two things might be in, if that makes sense. I'm curious about like how people are navigating whatever is going on in your personal emotional life with this work. Does it feel like the two have to remain separate? I recognize that the whole purpose of the course is like integrating all of these parts of yourself, not just the parts that are interested in justice, is the course for greatest like self-realization or greatest efficacy, or like deepest engagement, most embodiment, whatever terminology you want to slap on it. But yeah, I think that's the place where I am struggling right now, is this feeling of, if I lost a week to like crying and doing my own shit, is that a failing, or is it, like Mindy was describing, part of like, is being off the boat just as much a part of the process as getting back on the boat?
Okay, so I feel like you might relate to where I am right now. Have you ever heard of a poet called Andrea Gibson? She
Yes.
has a, okay,
Yeah.
yes, I just purchased her It Hurts to Become necklace, because like that email came to me the morning when I was just kind of struggling with a lot of the stuff that some of this is bringing up. Because I agree with you, you do have to figure out how to make it all work. But where I'm at, and maybe I'm wrong, I'm open to it, I've been wrong a lot lately, is that those answers, there's no set answer for that for anyone. Like there's not a metric that I can point myself at, or anyone has been able to point me to and say, this is exactly how much of this you should be able to take or do in every moment. And it's one of those I am forever becoming. Right now, this is how much I can handle of each of these, but it would sure be nice if I had this, but okay, this is how much I can handle, and I have goals to be able to handle more, but I'm also kind of understanding that that's going to just shift with me and what is happening in my life at that time. Because like, I'm sorry, but I've allowed myself to be 3 days behind on purpose, because I could feel my perfectionism kick going. Like I had my setup. It was 10 a.m. every morning, get it done, walk my dogs, clean work. Like it was down, but I was like, oh no, I'm speeding through this. Oh no, I'm not grasping. And I was also like, oh yeah, I'm not really having fun either, and not communicating that, okay, this is bad. So I really feel like, yeah, it hurts to become. Getting off the boat and getting back on is going to be part of it. And like, there's no point, I think, to where you will, or I will be ever completely perfect. And I think you have to be aware and accepting of that as much as everything else. Like, you're going to mess up, you may mess up again. It's just going to be a part of it.
I love that. Thank you. Also a really good reminder to go back to Andrea Gibson. Like yesterday, I think I cried like 5 separate times while reading poetry that came my way. Just like didn't intend to, but every time I read a poem, any poem, it didn't matter. I would just like, and I was like, oh, it's the poetry season. It's the time.
I mean, that's basically why I was crying that morning, because like, was it Boomerang Valentine and like all this other stuff? But I was just like, let me just cry and chug water and like cuddle my dog.
Anything else? That was super dope. I mean, I like what I'm hearing and all this great stuff. Any other responses to that?
I wish I had a response, but you guys worded this so perfectly. Like,
don't hurt yourself. Don't feel bad. It can be also like self-disclosure as well.
No, say it anyway, because like I feel like sometimes you say things in ways that I don't think about. That's why I was sad you weren't at the other meeting.
my heart. You see things like I feel the same. The feeling is so mutual. Yeah, like that. I'm so glad that you raised it as a question, Lucy. Like that you raised, is getting off the boat part of the process? I've been 2 weeks ago. I would have been like, not at this time. But or 3 weeks ago, I'd be like, not at this time. This time is about.
I love "not at this time" as a phrase. That's such a guy. I'm writing that down.
But yeah, I feel like this week I'm with Noah. I'm like, I think it's all part of the game.
So here's my follow-up question, which will always be mystical and weird. Is it possible to leave the ocean?
I mean, yeah, should be. Am I surrounded by sharks?
Well, just the metaphor that I heard hit and slap in this very specific way was that like we have this like vehicle that we've constructed. Maybe it's passed down to us. Maybe who knows what's going on, but we're on it and we feel safe about it for some reason. That there's this experience of outside the boat that feels less good and more watery and emotional and everything great. And I guess my question is the game, the driving the boat game, is the game the crossing the ocean game, or is the game something else that is inclusive of all but not any one of them? And if so, how does that affect any of those smaller games? The getting back on the boat game, the being on the boat game, the hanging out in the ocean game, the being a creature who used to be a fish but now is a land animal thing, but has some sort of deep history rememberings of being a water thing once upon a time.
So are you asking, hey, what's the main game and what are the side quests? Or are you saying, can you turn off the Xbox?
It's more the invitation of when one feels like they are not in the game, have they left the game?
Certainly that question of like layers is relevant and interesting to me. Like in terms of relationship, I've been thinking about this. It's like there are consistent patterns of behavior or emotional healing that I'm trying to do, right? And the whatever that definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. But like that is also, it is a shitty it's a shitty system, but it is sometimes the only one we have to just like keep battering against a thing until you have a unique outcome, until something different happens. And I've been thinking about this on like a micro level in terms of self-advocacy, right? Of like speaking up for what I want in relationship or being more honest about my needs. But then there are like broader level implications for that. And I think this has been the question of like, how do you extrapolate from these very small interactions around just like speaking truth in the moment around something relatively innocuous, right? Like whether or not you want bacon for breakfast or like whatever the thing is. But how that impacts, I was trying to think about like those diagrams while you were talking about the broader system that's not the boat or the ocean, of like the diagrams of the water cycle, of maybe it's then you're thinking about like the water evaporating off the ocean and going over the land and raining on the land and going back into the ocean. Like maybe it's that, but then what's outside of that system? Like is it a planetary thing? Is it a whatever? This is a very Wendell line of questioning.
So I ask these questions because that is my main form of play, is just to be like, okay, it feels like I'm losing. Is there this game of losing well, which is sometimes called sportsmanship, and can I play that game to a good degree of like, oh man, I'm losing. Okay, if I'm going to be caught losing, if I'm going to encounter myself losing, how do I want to encounter that? And that's one game that I think some of us are really good at. A lot of it is head hung in shame, pushing the neurochemicals in my body so that I experience this performative sadness. Like we can show contrition, and that is a sort of honorable thing to do. And some part of us goes, yes, we're winning. We feel like we're doing the thing right. We've made the picture, and this looks like the thing, and it's happy. And then there's the part of me, Chaos Demon et al., that's like, it looks like I'm about to lose this game. If I can zorp into a different game before that state happens, I will have fun doing the zorping, and almost certainly I'll have at least a different time being somewhere else, which is kind of a big dissociative strategy. But from a healthy dissociation, which is always the dance, like neither good nor bad, it's just like, would taking the larger perspective make the experience of the whole better, healthier, and more fun? Or does taking the smaller perspective make this experience of the whole better and more fun? And it's this weird way in which you can't answer the question without holding both, and yet you still can do discernment on like, well, how would I like to be the ocean cycle today? How would what would be novel? Like, is it the complete surrender of just like letting the currents go, or is it paddling in a direction? Like, I don't know, but like living that tension and being able to experience it as the only metric that I've been able to find that like is unimpeachable, which is this fun thing, this fun play, game, joy, homunculus. It's the one that on my inner dashboard, if that light is on while I'm doing anything, it's the best version I can hope of any of it. It's just like, the light's on? Okay, we're good. Lights off? My immediate question is, why? Can we get it back on in a way that still keeps the system like alive and healthy and not being destroyed? And that button exists right next to the normal button, which is panic. It just goes, bad. And I go, why? Bad. And I go, and I take a quick peek. And if it says bad and fun, I'm like, you know what? Let's just write this one out. I don't know what's going to happen, but if they're both on, let's stay put. If one is on, it's just play. I'm just like, keep going. Everything's great. Let's add more. But being able to even just have the choice of being like, okay, panic, joy, which is this weird way of taking like emotional logic, because I'm always going to be that weird left brain person, but I like playing with those structures. And what level of awareness allows me to change those beacons, essentially. Again, this is very meta, but like that's where I sort of try to bring that down into the practices of like, well, if they're doing a 3-2-1, the act of doing so towards the end of dealing with a panic thing can be fun. At the very least, the engagement with the panic is now at least flavored in an engaging, useful way. And that can be its own like micro paddle in the ocean towards something, at least. I don't know.
So there's go for it.
Are you sure?
Sure, okay, it's fine.
I just want to say, I feel like you just like explained how I got through the ally villain exercise, just because I had been out of it for like 2 days. I watched the video and I was like, that feels hard. That feels like a challenge. My brain was like, do you want to take a nap? And I was like, yes, brain, let's take a nap. And I didn't come back to it for like 2 days. And what you were describing, that like, oh, not being that how it's sort of fun to live in the shame part, but like, not meeting the goals and I'm ashamed. I was really bad about that like 10 years ago, like when I was in school. I took classes I enjoyed, but if it looked like I might fail them by midterm, I would drop them because I was like, why? It's better to not do this class that I enjoy and not fail than to do this class I enjoy and fail. Like I made choices like that a lot, and I felt like what I did with the ally villain exercise was the opposite of that. I was like, okay, my brain does not want to do this, so how can I make it fun? And for me, whenever I think of fun and imaginativeness, it always ends up being giants for some reason. Like if I'm driving and it's late at night, the trees look like giants. My brain is just like into giants somehow. And so I was like, okay, what if the villain's a giant? Because it's clearly somewhat scary. And it became a giant, and she's big and she eats goats, and like she eats them whole, like live. And then she has this like slimy sidekick. And I don't know, I just had like a lot of fun, like and the giant wants to fit in and she wants to like be nice to everybody, but she eats raw goats and she's carrying them. And so I had a lot of fun like making her, and it ended up getting me over the hump. So I appreciate the exercise and you inserting the fun into it because it totally seemed weird.
Okay, so Kimya Dawson, I Like Giants. I think you would like that song if you don't already know it.
I've never heard it. I'm gonna look it up.
Oh, which also takes me back to, so let's see. Yeah, about 4 years ago. Woo! Sorry, that's how old my nephew is. I kind of started this thing. I was fostering a dog. He was part corgi, part beagle, a whole mess to have. Poor thing was abused, and we were trying to get him used to training and having a regular life. And he used to do this thing we called face tanking. So because he actually required a physical punishment as part of this training, we would just spray him with a water bottle. That would be it. And we're like, are you sure? And they're like, yes, this is the only thing he responds to. He understands that if he's hit with the water, he needs to stop. And I was like, okay, except for bacon. So I lived with a roommate at the time who would just make huge things of bacon for unknown reasons. And he would literally do what we would call face tanking the water bottle. Like he would just take it straight in the face for bacon. And I started to apply that to some of my own restraints when it came to fear. Like, if the only thing that's really stopping me from doing this is the fact that, like, I'm afraid of a certain level of needed vulnerability to have fun, I'm just gonna, like, face tank the fear.
I love this dog wisdom. This is deep
Also,
wisdom.
sorry, my neighbor just started doing their yard.
Dog wisdom, Lucy?
Yeah, just like, yeah, I was just thinking about like how it's, I love the phrase needed vulnerability. It's like if you're avoiding like what it takes to really show up and get the thing that you want. Like, I don't know, a willingness to take it straight in the face to get the thing that you want. It's like very relatable to me. And like how uncomfortable are you willing to be? But also like not losing sight of what is, this is something I grapple with on a broader level all the time of like, we are taught that growth is uncomfortable, and you know, it's in our language, right? Like growing pains or what I like all of the stuff that we associate with it, and like change is scary, change is difficult. And I have been trying to think about like what is in my life. Sometimes I have struggled to distinguish between needless suffering and growth-oriented discomfort. And sometimes I have stayed in situations that were not good for me because I thought, well, I'm hurting, that must mean I'm growing. And that is not always the same thing. And that has come up too in doing this work of like, am I, there's always this anxiety about one's intuition. I think for me, especially with like taking time off from doing this work or like deciding to allocate my resources elsewhere, is there's always this hypervigilance of like, are you copping out? Are you running away? Are you backing off when you need to be doubling down? And I think gaining that trust in oneself of, I love your idea, Wendell, of encountering this as a practice. There's a Reedy who wrote a book, Gary Rogowski, who's a master woodworker. Did you read this book?
We were in the same talk. We did the salon.
That alumni thing. I wasn't there though.
You weren't there? Anyway, I was at his talk. Yeah. Anyway, it was fucking amazing.
He gave a talk and I was so excited. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to hear this guy speak. And then I couldn't make it for some reason. So I read his book instead. that I badgered the college and asked them to record it, and I don't think they did. But there are so many things. I was just flipping through. I have my notes from when I was reading it, and I was just looking to see if there was something specific about that notion of like not having beginner's mind. And so this guy is like a master woodworker, and he wrote a book about craft and the practice of making things, and thinking about my creative career as craft has certainly been very fruitful and relevant for me over the last few years. But I love the idea of allyship as craft. Something that I've been thinking about a lot is the word disciple, which does butt up against, you were like, no, it's not really religion. It's not really like a calling. But I like the notion of disciple as like you are attuned to something bigger than yourself, right? You are finding a thing that you consider holy, perhaps in a secular way. It doesn't have to be religious. But the root of like the idea of discipline and to disciple and like practice or vocation, I guess is a word. Like this has been a big debate in my brain for years now of like, what is my relationship to the things that I value? And is it an entrepreneurial one? Is it a religious one? Is it and you know, when I think about it, I was trying to find this the other day. I ran a Twitter poll like maybe a year or two ago about what people thought of their creative practice. If it was a practice, if it was a religion, if it was a job. And it was fascinating. Like the discussion was really interesting. And one of the things people brought up was the idea of a vocation. It's like something you are called to do. It doesn't necessarily have a religious undertone, but does carry some of that sense of being like drawn to it. Anyway, this is a long walk around to being like, that's the bacon, right? Like keeping your eye on the bacon. So you're not just sitting there taking the water bottle to the face for no reason. Like you wouldn't, there's a universe, I guess, where your dog would stand there and just get sprayed in the face for no reason, but like that doesn't seem likely. There was something the dog wanted, and so it was worth it to like go through that. I don't know, I think about that from like a stoicism perspective, even of if you have your eye on the place that you want to go, it's easier to endure the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune or whatever it is that you're grappling with.
I will not lie, I think it was something about yellow, but I totally ran back to my stupid, ridiculous leather-bound philosophy collection, grabbed my copy of Marcus Aurelius Meditations, and just was like, okay, yeah, no, let's re-dive into this as an adult, not an edgelord teen.
What was that like for you? I'm so curious, because our copy of the meditation surfaced in this house during quarantine as well, and I didn't read it as a younger person, and now I'm like really fascinated about what people's experiences have been like.
So I find a lot of these books that I read when I was younger, it's kind of like rereading like the original Winnie the Pooh. I'm gonna get a different message every time. And current message is more like, all right, younger you kind of had some points, but you were missing like a lot of wisdom and just general knowledge in life. Like, well, or how can I put it? As I journaled, I forgive myself because there's no fucking way I could have known that shit. I was like 12.
I wonder about that with like being a mentor figure to younger people, of like because the insufferable thing that older, wiser people do is like, you're young, you don't know anything. Like which is a great way to get teens to listen to you. But I wonder about that, like how to meet, certainly in doing the self-work of examining like who we are on the deep down, or these past parts of ourselves. Like how do you speak to those parts where they are at and treat them with compassion and acknowledge their wisdom without making them feel belittled because you are so advanced in your current iteration?
So this is something that I learned from my niece, because she is the opposite of me in a lot of ways. She is very extroverted, go get it, I'm going to tear the world down. And there's a lot of talent she has that I did not have at her age, and a lot of confidence that I am happy to see stuck, as it was I put a lot of work into instilling that in her. There's a lot of things I could tell her, but the best thing I've ever really done that has worked for me and for all the other kids who kind of wander into my life is I can't really tell them anything. I can't really warn them, but I can arm them for war.
Here's Sting. It glows when orcs are nearby. It's yours now. Yep. Here's a mithril coat. Don't get stabbed by a troll, please.
Don't go alone. Take this.
So this is, again, I'm going to just do a little magician revealing the curtain. The reason why we do developmental levels after we do like the different parts, but we introduce these like different roles, is because there's a very important question that I'm going to just invite all of you to sort of ask your parts when you're engaging with them, because I feel like you have enough discernment to do it now. Discernment, disciple, decide, learn, they're all etymologically connected. So that was just something that immediately emerged where I was like, yes, a disciple decides every single day to be a disciple. A learner decides every day to be a learner. If the practice of deciding becomes easier, everything kind of falls. And if you get more people that can help you decide, everything is great. One of the definitions of intuition that I've been working with is I think intuition is just like a weird blind vote of all of your parts at any given time. I want to or I don't want to do this is everyone being like, well, we can't all speak, so we'll all press our buttons, and then again, a light will turn on that says, okay, that's my hunch, I'll do it. And the more that you're in tune with the people that are making the decisions, the more you can influence them, the more that you can put yourself in situations that will allow the ones who want to have the outcomes that you would like to be on board, to feel like it's safe to like do the thing. So much so that sometimes you can have just total background processes run things as you get to just remain present, healthy, happy, and practicing like being okay. I've went too many levels deep, but ultimately the thing that the course is meant to help you is to figure out how to talk to parts of you from the past, but not as though they were past. Like time, present, future, past. I don't like going there directly because it's really so hardwired into our brains to like situate reality that way. But remembering, putting things back together is a creative act. And so the ability to go to a lower developed person without having to go to the past and then have to have all your feelings and what have yous about the past has been, at least for me, one of the best ways to sort of bring those parts back online. So the new question that I'm sort of offering to you is ask your parts how old they think they are and how old they think you are when you're talking to them. It will be very enlightening, I hope, because
actually I've kind of already had this conversation, but I just put it in a personal journal because it got weird.
Yep, it gets very weird because suddenly it's like, why do you think I'm this age? That probably means why you're so bossy all the time. You don't think I'm the 29-year-old so-and-so. You think that I'm like a younger version of a very sad version of you. And well, this makes total sense. You're just goofed on what this is. And you're not going to believe it until I can meaningfully speak your language to even convince you that like your proper role is below, but not like in a you suck, but just in a I legit know more than you. And like I have to, it's my job as the upper to prove that and not your job to sort of get in alignment. And I've never found success in doing that direct pointing to like, sometimes we can do these practices that can slide through the side door of like the negative belief flip is like, just do your weird echo dance. Just kind of say hello and see when the hello comes back and then just go there. Very abstractly, very intangibly, but that's the closest that will come to literally going to a place in one's past. Because I don't know if you're anything like me, I think that I was a big dumb idiot every 5 years. That's like the classic thing. And so everything that I did was terrible, except for when it wasn't. And the only times that I ever find out that it wasn't is when a friend tells me, oh yeah, well I was friends with you because like you were chill like that. I was like, well either you're stupid too, or I'm still stupid somehow. And the ability to sort of be your own friend is like that internal work of figuring out like who you are and where you want to go and all this stuff becomes that work. Before I make this jump, because this has been a very generative conversation, I've heard from everyone, this is really amazing. I want to first open up to see like if does anyone else want to like dig down into the work that has sort of popped up for them today. I guess really specifically Noah and Mindy. And then two, I want to just, if there's nothing else, and that's totally, again, we've got infinite space for it, but the next question I think dovetails to this. And I'll just actually say what that question is, and then you can open up. What is the difference between friendship and allyship? That's the question we're going to discuss, but I'm still interested in like if there's any sort of troubleshooting that you want to do in the work.
Okay, so quick question. Allyship as it currently stands or allyship as I'm currently trying to craft in my world?
Yes.
Well, son of a bitch, that's not fair. I only have an answer to one of those.
Well, that's fine. We'll talk about that then. But yes, does anyone want to explore, like, again, was there anything that just like very specific, like I need to get the answer to this so I can keep doing the work tomorrow? If there's no more questions of that, then we can move on to that one. But Looks like Mindy, maybe. Yes.
I have a super fast question about
Yeah.
the age question. I've been asking it in each 3-2-1. I've been using your unpacking questions in all of them, but the one that I get stuck on is what age does this part think you are? I'm like, well, if this part's part of me, then it knows like how old I am. It can look at me and tell that I look relatively 30-ish, and that is all. Like, I take it very literal. Do you have advice on how to not be so literal?
No, I mean, that's real. All I would say is recognize the feeling of answering that question. And even as you like said it, I saw like your vibe shift, and I can assume that if you were answering that question that way, you weren't answering as the character. You were answering as you, thinking what the character would have to know. Did we talk about the ball? I love talking about the ball. The red ball, green ball?
The red and green?
Yeah, it's a red ball, green ball problem. You jumped to that person's perspective because you knew that it had a different perspective, but you didn't ask it from its perspective, what ball was it seeing? And the thing with the red ball, blue ball is at the level of how old are you inside, it's a much more complicated ball. It's not red, blue, it's all sorts of weird junk that can happen. And so it's fine to go there, but it'll feel the same. And like, I really would just suggest being aware of, as you're doing a 3-2-1, when you get to that question, if you're jumping out and then jumping back in, or if you're actually riding the wave, because it'll feel different. Each part has its almost like an energetic signature. It just feels like itself. And when you're in the two, like in the one, you feel like you talking to it. In the two, you feel like a kind of ping pong. And in the one, you're feeling it. Just be aware of like any parts of any of that process in which you've merged or jumped in a way that's different than like the segment. So like, that's one where I hear that I go, oh yeah, there was a logical process that was done as opposed to sort of a gut heart. And this is, I guess, it's a tangential thing, but that I'll feel free to bring up. It's because it's not tangential, it's fundamental. The intuition that we're trying to develop is to be able to tap into the gut heart intelligence of parts of us. So the mental is easy, it's just a puzzle, but eventually you get to that spot where when you inhabit at the one level, your body feels different because you're suddenly like, you're experiencing sort of something else, and that the heart gut intelligence is fast. And that's why we're training our intuition, where eventually if we get the understanding of a part so deep that we can get to its heart gut intelligence, when we switch over there, we don't have to think, oh, what do you want? We just go, oh, I'm here, this one's hungry, and then you can jump back in. And it's that type of switching that we're really training. So the ability to hold on to that felt sense of the part should resolve that issue. At the very least, it should point out like very clearly, like, oh yeah, I've jumped. Even if I'm right or wrong, it doesn't matter. I've jumped. The practice is just inhabiting.
That makes a lot of sense, because now that you mention, I didn't have that problem with the giant because she's like a big scary giant, and so like my answer to that was she's indifferent to my age because I am so small. Like it was a lot easier to get into that headspace. So like, yeah, okay, I think I can work with that. I think I'm also gonna, if this is helpful to y'all at all, I think I'm also gonna move the how old does it think you are? How old are you? I'll put how old are you still at the beginning because that's been helpful, but I think I'm gonna move how old does it think I am further down the list, so that way I'm a little bit more in the headspace.
Yes. Oh, and also, again, by the time you get to the fun section, the 3-2-1s basically do whatever you want. Like you should be able to sort of recognize that the questions act as Legos, and you can start building like your own Lego walls. You've done it enough times that if you ever get confused, you can always come back to it, but you can start really expanding. And I'll add one more, and then we'll jump to the next question because I just love this one. It's powerful. It makes the 3-2-1s do take about sometimes twice as long, but it really brings up one of those feelings that we talked about in the group call two weeks ago. Do the second stage again, but from the perspective of the other person. So where there's one person constantly asking the question, like, what do you want to create? Before you go to the one stage, just jump back to the top, switch roles, and have your part ask you all of those questions. What experience do you want to create for it? What experience do you like? And just sort of see, like, and so have them actually be in full dialogue. I keep them separate because the part that we're training is this sort of detached, wise, but embodied state. But when you add that piece in there, that's all I can say is it's pretty dope, actually. It solves some of the problems of the fact that, like, sometimes your parts don't trust you because it knows you're reading from a script. Knowing that you have to answer the same questions will crank up the trust feeling. It'll be more inclined to, sometimes you can't inhabit it because the part's kicking you out. It's just like, nope, you don't get this perspective because you'll do something I don't trust with it. Being able to share both perspectives sometimes makes that easier. At least that's happened for me.
do love that this is like the Zeno's paradox of exercises, is that like the longer we're in the course, do you remember at the beginning when you were like, oh yeah, it's take like 5 minutes, 5 minutes for the whole thing, just like real fast, 1 minute per thing. And now I'm like an hour per, sitting there like dredging through all of this content.
But you can stop. That's the key. I always keep telling people is that like, yeah, this can go as long as you want, and the ultimate dance, don't worry, in a few weeks this will become very clear, because that's basically like the wrap-up content is you get to choose. You get to choose what version of the stretch. Some people are choosing the depth, which is fun. Most people don't get tools for depth, and that's where I get to. I'll spend 2 hours on a 3-2-1 because it no longer feels like a chore, because introspection is fun for me. If the 3-2-1 is meant to just be like a tool and all I'm trying to do is cut some planks, its speed, the length of the speed actually gets in the way of my outcomes, and that person, I can't make that decision for them. They have to make the shift. Because they're anchored in that 30-minute space, the questions become immediately meta, like, what is getting in the way of me being able to show up in this practice so that it takes me more than 30 minutes? And it's holding that intention and meeting that part that knows the answer that gets them that result. And then some people are like, how can I go deeper? And this felt like a deeper question. So I was like, yeah, you can go as deep as you fucking want. Like, it adds this like nuance and soup. But there's another set of exercises and ways to modify it for speed. And there's ways to modify it for strength. And there's ways to modify it for interpersonal relationship. It's really just, once you've held and found your intention, the questions of like how to get it to sort of fit your container emerge pretty much immediately. But yes, 100% Zeno's paradox. You could spend an entire life just 3-2-1-ing, which is why it's always, again, the last section is going to be like, now that we've done all of this, start building some shit. Like, build your structures. Let's go. Let's actually like make some stuff. And I forgot that's what we're doing next. So I'm going to run to the potty, but the question will be, and I'm just going to let you do it. I don't need to hear this. I'll see the recording. But what's the difference? What are the similarities, differences between allyship and friendship? Have at.
Can I be super annoying and answer the question with a question?
Yeah, 100%.
I fully support you.
I feel like I have been chewing on this a lot. And it might have a lot to do with like maybe my relationship with social media not being like, I'm not, not me not spending a lot of time on there. But like, should there be a difference between allyship and friendship? Or are you just an ally to people you know in real life and you hope it benefits everyone else?
I think for me, so when I started this, my whole thing with allyship was like, if it's not my problem, how are you my ally? But what it's really come down to for me is, all right, so I watch a lot of anime. I watch a lot of animes that maybe don't teach the life lessons I would want to teach to my niece, but The Ancient Magus Bride is one I was watching that deals with some personal growth stuff from so she's a young girl. She's sells herself into slavery because she's a magic person who can do magic things, but her body is weak. And she's bought by this Magus, my guy, who's all like, I'm gonna make you my bride. And then it's just like hijinks from there. Yeah, she's 15, and he is a fey creature, so he is of unknown age, literally unknown origin. Like, they're all like, hey, Tatiana, your husband, how old is this dude? They're like, we don't know, we found him in the forest and raised him to be our own. Legit. But what this anime brought home for me in a really interesting way, and I also recommend A Passionate Marriage for this, is partnership versus saviorism. That was my issue with allyship, is that for me, a lot of it involved what I felt like saviorism behaviors. And there was actually a poem, not my poem, someone else's poem I posted called like Compassion Tiredness. And when she was going through it, it was just like, that's what it is for me. My friends, sure, they're my friends. There may be times where they're like, get away from me, I need a nap. But if in the middle of that nap, my skirt catches on fire, they will come and put that fire out. They may beat me about the head and shoulders for, wearing long, flowy clothing or cooking over a stove, but they will come. Versus saviorism, which always seems to be really about when it's convenient and looks good for the person doing the saving. And this is something that I have figured out for me crosses outside of allyship for race into like the LGBTA space, especially like in trans rights, in like a lot of the stuff I'm involved in, you see so many people who are ready. They are ready to come in. They are ready to be your savior. They are ready to like be the hero, but they're not actually really ready to be your friend. And there's a difference in that for me. So that's kind of what it is. Like, are we actually going to build a partnership? Is this going to be a give and take? Or is this going to be about how you look saving me? Also, I really recommend that anime. It's super good. It's really good. Just with salt. There's some stuff.
There's a question in there too about dimensionality. Like I appreciate that perspective so much of partnership versus saviorism. I think that's, for me, when I think about saviorism, it's like often a lack of dimensionality, right? Like you're viewing a person as a set of problems to be solved or like needs to be addressed, which is like a checklist, and people aren't checklists. And I suppose when I'm struggling to feel like whether there is a difference here. I was thinking about like, well, is it a question of like willingness to experience discomfort to take care of another person or to support another person? Like often we consider, and this gets at the conversation. I don't know. Did either of you watch the video talk between Wendell and Salim? That was, I watched it last week because I missed the video call, and I was like, well, I'll watch something today because I set aside an hour to do this thing. Salim's another kid who went to Reed, and he and Wendell had a conversation that touched on the question of what is the difference between an ally and an accomplice, and whether that's like, does ally sound more like a role in a battle? You know, when we talk about like the allies in World War II, is that like a problem-solving approach, whereas an accomplice is someone who is, I don't know, it's like all of these terms feel like they are circling similar things.
Okay, so is it like, oh no, I was gonna say, is it like, hey, who is your friend, who's your ride or die? Because that's kind of what I'm picking up from that.
Yeah, totally. And like the people who would be there for you and who would experience discomfort, right? Like I think about, I had a friend of mine who lost his mother in a car accident and like needed all of his people to come and be with him. And some of his people included an ex of mine who had a new partner who did not like me at all. And like the idea of going and spending time with them was very uncomfortable. But when I think back on that, I'm like, I went to that meal, I sat at that table because like there were more important things than my comfort. And that is not like, I'm proud of myself in that moment for that energy. It's not energy that I'm able to bring to the table every time, you know, and in every context. But that, yeah, that for me is like when I try to go back to thinking about the question of what would I do for my friends, I guess for me, like the question often boils down to like, not how can we save more people, but how can we make more friends? Because like the more, or like, how can we create spaces that make it easier for us to reveal our humanity to each other? And like,
how can we make our friends move confidently and make them feel like they can move confidently in the world? Okay.
Yes.
So I feel like what it really, so this also brings something else up too that, once again, personal journal, but popped out of this is, if we are going to talk about allyship, it means that you, as the person who is requiring the ally, or I do like accomplice, am I allowed to set boundaries with you when you're helping? Because that's one thing about saviorism that doesn't often happen. Like, you can't say no, otherwise it's a problem.
So I'm coming in late, but I'm just going to piggyback up with just the basic things that I'm hearing. I feel really happy to be missing information in this conversation. There's a power dynamic that I feel like this balances. But that hits something like hits me right in my chest. Like my friends, I tell them exactly how they're allowed to help because I don't want them doing boring shit at me. Real talk, this course happened because my friends were doing that. They were like, I'm helping. And I'm like, didn't ask for it. If you knew anything about my life, you know that everything is fine. This is my boundary. And because of who I am as a nightmare person, I then went and gave myself a whole bunch of work to explore intellectually the process of doing that thing, but it was fun. Where I was just like, yeah, I don't like the intersection of this. I really don't like when my friends are showing up as allies, they're showing up as worst friends, and I don't like it. It's garbage. That means there's something inherently problematic with how they're showing up as both friends and allies, and I kind of want to tackle both of them, because I do think that the people who are seeking allyship have at least a little bit of responsibility setting people up for success in that. Because I've been in situations where I'm just like, I would really like to watch this person who claims to care about me fail miserably. And it's not a healthy part of me. I know that part. I know the specific sub-basement that they live in, and I know the specific type of joy they get being like, I need 14 gold radishes. And the person's like, oh, well, I guess friendship means I need to get the gold radishes. I'm like, they don't even exist. I actually even ate the last one. I know this, but I want you to fail. I want to see how willing you are to die. But I haven't actually helped anyone except my weird petty part of me, and yet everyone could observe that interaction and still be like, good allyship was occurring. And I'd be like, I don't know. It feels, and I'm telling the story in this way to make myself feel villainous, but like, it doesn't feel like the thing. It doesn't feel like it's hitting at the essence of what healthy either one would be doing. And that makes me, again, more think that there's some sort of essential connection.
All right, so I've been going deep into African mythology, and I was talking to my grandma about it, and she was like, I will tell you my favorite parable that I heard from like your So Many Greats grandfather. And it's one, I know you guys may like it, but it's don't take a shirt from a naked man.
Yep. Don't take a shirt from a naked man.
I mean, it makes sense.
And I think really recognizing what giving and taking means. Like, it feels like at a certain level of proximity to myself, I feel attuned to what my friends need and am open to getting the shit kicked out of me when I get it wrong. Usually as a funny bit, like, oh, I'm getting razzed because of how much I goof this social contract, but I'm being razzed and included as opposed to stop having friend doings to me. And so I don't really spend any mental energy cultivating my practice of friendship, which I could still probably stand to do, but I just don't do it. It's easy. I get the call. I show up. Even when I don't show up, I feel the requisite, like, I'm not showing up the right way, but I got this other stuff going on. And if I have to have that awkward conversation, I sort of have it as just a function of the maturity of my friendships go. And I feel like a lot of people in allyship, myself included, springboard off of really strong friendly intent, where they're like, I have reached the level of friendship here, and I shall bring those skills into what essentially amounts to a new pile of different types of relationships, essentially asking for marriage on the first date. And it feels like, yeah, that's why that's not succeeding.
I think this is definitely an uncomfortable truth about these moments of reckoning. Like, if something goes down on social media, if somebody says some transphobic bullshit, or perhaps there is a mass social justice movement in the streets of your country, and like that prompts you to think like, oh, I could be doing a better job looking out for my people who are in whatever category of person who's being impacted by the trauma of the day. And there is, I think, asking for marriage on the first date is a really striking way of putting it, Wendell, that it leads to this very transparent grasp for forced intimacy that is more about the person reaching out than the person doing the receiving. But then there's also a knowledge of like wanting to take action in that moment and trying to figure out how to harness that impulse to do something positive. And something that I've just been reflecting on for myself is like, not necessarily what can I do in the heat of the moment? Like, is it appropriate? Like, I've found myself asking questions of like, I don't even know if friend X likes flowers. You know, like I want to send them flowers, or like I want to buy them lunch. I don't even know what their favorite thing to have for lunch is. Like, what kind of friend am I if I don't know that? And it has caused me to ask more questions about where my intimacies are. And I think the thing that I'm wondering is like, how am I going to carry that impulse to know my friends better? And this is as somebody who like, I struggle with friendship more broadly. Like I am not great at cultivating close friendships. I am often like very consumed by my work, or I tend to get really distant. And like, I found that the people I have the deepest connections to are people who are comfortable with the fact that I disappear for months at a stretch and then will like pop up out of the blue. And like, if they could be comfortable with that and be like, hey, we haven't spoken in 2 years, but like, let's go deep for 4 hours about our shared humanity, like, that is a good thing for me.
I call that
But some
special
of
guest
this
star
is about,
Wendell.
yeah. This, oh God, the special guest star thing. Wendell, do you follow Tessa Hulls? Do you know her? She's a Reedy. She's a cartoonist. She did a piece about this feeling of being like, she drew a parable about a cat that always shows up in her neighborhood, and anytime the cat rolls through, everyone is like, oh my God, it's this cat. I love this cat. Wow, I don't know who this cat belongs to, but God, it's a cool cat. I feel blessed that we got to see this cat. And then the cat leaves, and nobody stops to question like where the cat goes after it's done being an exciting cameo figure in everybody's lives. And like, she was talking about how she really felt like she occupied this space of being somebody who often works in a very solitary environment, but becomes like almost a caricature, that people are like, oh, a Tessa sighting, and then she goes away again, and there's like not a lot of community, like accountability there. And so I suppose I love this question about friendship and allyship, but really just even the basic question of like, what is friendship? Like, how do friendship? And especially as adults, like, we're all trying to figure out how to fucking make and keep friends, and growing and changing, and like maintaining friendships with people who knew us when we were different people. Like, there's value in that, as you said, Wendell, of having someone who can say, I knew you when, and I thought you were pretty chill dude, instead of like, oh yeah, I knew you back then, and you know, you were a pile of poo, and I can't see you as whatever you've evolved into now, right? Because I'm stuck there. Anyway, there's a ton in this. I'm rambling, but it's a good
you
question.
kind of make a really good point. Like, I recently, okay, so I guess not recently to anyone else, but there was an issue in my personal group of, so I'm a big believer in dating people. Like, I feel like we somehow lost the idea of dating to get to know potential friends and spouses, and just automatically go into relationships. And there's a person who I've kind of known, and I've kind of known them for a really long time, but I wouldn't have ever called us friends. And so we finally like sat down the other day, and she's great. She's actually a really great person. And like, we had this awesome conversation. Actually went to go hang out with someone else later on that day, and I was super tired because of it. But like, you know, it's just like, wow, we've really connected. I'm so glad that we're friends now. And she kind of got a little bit offended and like didn't talk to me for a bit. And I was like, okay, take your space. I don't care. But like, she was like, well, I thought we were already friends. She's like, I've been on your Facebook for years. And I was just like, oh, okay. I didn't know that was a thing. And sometimes it's like, am I really that bad at social cues, or are social cues just messed up? Like, because to me, a Facebook friendship, it's like, it's an acquaintanceship. If I see you, I'll wave at you. I'm gonna invite you over for porch tea and beer, but that's not like, they're like, I have layers. It's an onion. You can't see all of it. Oh, not at first. I'm sorry.
I want to throw out another diagram. Because I just, in my own journey, I think this has helped me, is that in my pursuit of any type of ship, let's call the horizontal axis the ship. They're all the same: relationship, allyship, fellowship, friendship. It is a vehicle to go somewhere. And not to say that somewhere should be decided, but that it seems like it's a container, and that there are different types of that container. And then there, for any given person, is a sort of altitude, depth, effectiveness, but really we're just going to call it positive altitude. Says this is moving in a positive direction that makes me feel closer to this person. And then there's sort of a negative one where it's like, if I stay on this ship, both of us are going to be worse than when we started, and that there are certain activities, behaviors, space going on. Now I want to kind of pull out of that space the two horizontal segments of allyship and friendship, and just kind of make them opposed arbitrarily, but still recognize that there are negative experiences of when someone's going hard in the paint on allyship. In a negative aspect, there's a quadrant that exists that, and when someone exists more like a friendship, and there's negative things on that, and then there's positive traits of friendship that are separate from the positive traits of allyship. And what I'm really curious about is, what does it look like to build a life in which that y-axis, that right in that middle, that zero blurring lines of friendship, allyship, what does it feel like to build a life entirely just out of that?
Honestly, like, I'm minding my own boundaries.
This is a generic affirmation, but without, like, I like that. Is anyone else have something to say about that. I'm trying not to say things, but I keep saying things about not saying things.
Well, I have a question because I think I might be misreading. Here is the chart I drew.
Oh, I love it.
Positive direction, negative direction, and then the ships.
Yes.
It's the middle, just a neutral spot where the ships are in the middle, and it's neither positive nor negative.
Yeah, I'd say yeah. If the on the y-axis, that middle is just sort of like we don't know. It's in stasis, and I sort of bring that image into awareness because so much of what we're trying to do is like get out of stuckness. And so if someone is living in a stuck experience, I can go without seeing a whole lot of data and be like, great, you have both sides pulling against each other in a tug of war. You can only say stuck if most of your momentum was keeping you in an equilibrium. The question then being like, well, what activities, behaviors, traits does a life have where that neutral zone is always trending up and in sort of, I guess basically like sort of balance of the interesting differences between allyship and friendship, but always like sort of being able to create structures that can inhabit both. And again, this is utterly abstract. I've built an abstract structure and I'm basically asking you to fill it with personal experiences like I do, but that's where I think it gets interesting. For whatever reason, my gut tells me that the more that people are able to do that, that's going to affect the ease, the fun in that same way of just like me blurring the lines between allyship and friendship, assuming that I have healthy friendships, means that it's just as easy as letting my like homie like Mark call me and tell me about like a cool skate park we got to go to, or my friend Tess being like, let's go watch a movie, or someone else just reaching out to me being like, I know you like books, here's books. But it's this integrative space that's constantly growing me in that aspect. I think what I'm really interested in is like, what are the things that are missing out of my own life? For example, my big stretch is because I've segmented all of my ships into sort of different goals, and that's why I kind of pulled out the allyship and the friendship, that there are maybe aspects of like my relationship that don't actually inspire my ability to be like an ally or a friend to people, that there's actually a dynamic tension in that. And how do I build intimate relationships that support friendships, that support my allyship, that support all of these different things, so that I'm not playing a whack-a-mole game, but I just get to show up knowing that like all of my, call it my D&D stats, are being pushed towards a direction that I like. And how does one recognize the deficiencies without internalizing the deficiencies, being like, oh, I'm missing here, so I'm a crap sack, I'm terrible, this is bad, versus, oh, great, I found the hole. What does it make to increase structures in my life that are easy, sustainable, and emergent of whatever psychograph I've created for myself that allows me to move into that space? And can I do it in a way that's fun?
So man, sorry to bring this back to Andrea Gibson, but man, forever becoming hurts.
I was trying to find something that I had jotted down a while ago about the like 3 precursors to friendship, and how they're so naturally met when we're younger, because it's something like frequency, lack of direction. There's like the school generally fulfills this, that like you see the same people in a regular container and there's unstructured time in which to connect with those people. And that's how you form like spontaneous friendships. And the original article that I had read about this was pointing out the fact that as adults, it's a lot harder for us to access spaces that give us regular contact with people over time. And Wendell, when you were talking about how your different friends are engaging with you, I was really struck by this feeling of like, I guess a lot of my friendships I'm cultivating on a longer timeline. And I could have one very like, no, I relate to that thing of like sitting down with a person and like cementing your friendship, like maybe you've danced around each other for a long time and then you have like the one conversation. But there are some people with whom I like have that one conversation and I'm like, all right, we're good. I don't want to go and like sit down and have that conversation again next week. But then there are some other people where I'm like, oh, I do want to continue to have this conversation on a regular basis. Like every friendship has its own cadence. Mm-hmm. And I think that notion of cadence really relates to this idea that people keep raising of like, this is a marathon, not a sprint. Like you can't do friendship overnight. It doesn't really work. Just like you can't fix society overnight. It's just going to take a longer purview. But I wish I could find those three. I was Googling, but I couldn't find those the three.
It sounds like
also, I support like having friends for things. Like I have friends who I met them in my biking group. I have friends who I still only well, we're going to start hanging out again because I'm going to start roller skating again. I have friends who I can have really deep, intimate conversations with. I have friends or bar friends, and I haven't actually seen them in a really long time, but like you can have different friends for different things, and that's okay.
Well, and that sort of brings out the different, again, I've created these arbitrary boxes, mostly to break them because it delights me to do so. The horizontal is always interesting to me because the horizontal is types, the horizontal is context, the horizontal is here is where I found you, here is where I get to have my space with you. And at any given moment, I'm always asking the question of what level of depth do I want to go with you? What kind of friendship do I want to build? Am I building an aircraft carrier? Am I building a sloop? This is totally, I'm totally setting you up, Lucy. I apologize.
Mix your boat metaphors, Wendell. Fucking go for it. Get in there.
Am I building a raft? I've had my friendship rafts where I'm just like, here's the thing. We're at work. We hate everybody. We're going to cobble together this raft, and this is all we have. And when the war is over, deuces. And maybe we're friends because of the war, but like we constantly have to go back to the war to have any sort of meaningful connection because what else are we going to do? IEC All Read alumni. But that the awareness of the types of ships that you like to craft in your context, and this is the sort of, hopefully the aha moment. I believe the first step for me, and this is why we've been doing all this crazy stuff and why I'm introducing this question at this exact moment, is self-friendship is first. If you can have friendship with your parts, which are all different and are all different ages and are all having these different experiences, and sometimes they're liking and sometimes they're not, and sometimes they hate you, and so you can develop at least a practice and an awareness of being able to create friendship just with yourself. You can have friendships, I've experienced this, friends that are specifically friends because you have compatible just parts. Just like, oh, my petty Pendergrass can hang out with petty people. When I find them, I go, you get to drive the car today. We're going to talk some mad shit for hours with this person. And I can feel sort of safe to do that. And if they want to get closer to me, I'll be like, this is great. Petty Pendergrass is a bit I do. If you would like to come closer, I actually have a different ship that is more inclusive of all of my parts. And you're totally welcome to come in. And that seems like the boundaries that you're talking about, Noah, where it's like, yeah, if I just want to let this like energy out and go do its weird thing and have a relationship with it, and I know that it's safe and it's not going to ruin my life or someone else's life, go to town, talk mad shit as much as you want. Like, it's been really helpful for me to let that part out, because otherwise it was just me bullying my friends who did not want to talk shit. And I was like, that's not a look. I can't just be doing that recreationally because I'm bored. Like, I should cultivate friendships in which that is a grammatical thing to do, but I can only do that to the degree that I've befriended that part of myself.
As someone who's been on the other side of, we are going to have serious conversations all the time, it's like, I quickly realized, like, for me, that is an easy area to start building resentment.
Wendell, that idea of grammar, I relate to. I was thinking about this the other day, talking with a friend on Twitch about like platform-based dialects or idioms, that like the way that we cultivate ourselves for different online spaces or different online platforms has its own internal logic, right? Like there is a self that you put on Twitter that might not be the same self you put on Instagram. And they're all, and I was thinking about this as a kind of parts work of like, what are these different elements of myself? And how do I like show or hide them? And I love the notion of a grammar of friendship, that like, what's the particular idiom of your friend group? This is making me think about, a while ago, just because I was curious, I tried to like subdivide my friends into categories. Like this is it's a more essentialist view, but I guess I was thinking about it from a Jungian perspective, because I have a friend who's really into Jung and had me do, stop me if I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but she had me do this exercise that she had come up with, where you like go through all of the people in your life that you've had very strong, like intense, all-consuming crushes or love affairs with or on, and write down, like pick, whatever, 10 people. It could be people you've had a very strong negative reaction to. She was just like, whatever is this thing you talk about, Wendell, right? Of like, there's resonance there. Something feels electric. And you write down a list of character traits for each person. And then you divide them into 4 columns. And the first column is have. So you go through those characteristics and you're like, which of these things that I was drawn to in these other people do I already confidently possess in myself? And then you make a list that's like wants. Which of these characteristics do I covet in other people because I feel like I don't have them already? And then there's the admitting column, or the darker truths column, where you're like, oh, these are negative traits in all of these people that I didn't like about them because I see them in myself. And then there's a column of like, this doesn't really apply. This person is not relevant to me. This shit was so cool. It was so fascinating. It was so cool and fascinating. I did it like 2 years ago, and I feel like it's something I really want to return to every few years, because I went back and looked at the list recently and was like, damn, all of the stuff that was in the wants column, like a lot of this has changed. A lot of it has been internalized, and now there's new things in that, which is really exciting. But it's gotten me thinking about like, who are the people in my life who I thrill to the most? What kinds of categories do they fall into? And what can I learn about what I am trying to cultivate in myself, or how to be a better friend to myself by that resonance that I feel with other people, right?
I didn't even know that was a thing. My therapist had me do that. For reasons, I tend to get like special interest in historic figures, and sometimes I dig too greedily and too deep and need to like back out. But part of that was something she had me do, was like, why do you like this historic figure so much? What about them do you or hate? What do you hate about this historic figure so much? Like, what is like, and she basically had me take it apart to make it easier to pull out of those, like, just when I go too deep into the interest, it's easier to pull out because I better understand what I'm getting from it. But are there like instructions? I can find that somewhere. I'm curious.
I will totally put this in, like I can put it in the Facebook group or just write it up.
Oh, yes, please.
Yeah, she just told me over the phone, but I'll write it down. It's like I think that was a self-devised thing. This is Mara Zepeda Wendell who put this together when I called her after a relationship. And was like, Mara, like, what do I do?
I'm so obsessed.
Yeah,
with
she's
her.
very kooky and like super into Jung and very into all of these notions. And she told me about this thing. She was like, look, this is pretty weird. I don't know if it's anything yet. I've just been trying it. Try this. Let me know how it goes. And then I tried it and I was like, fuck, this is genius.
Do I have to talk to Mara again? Every time I think about her, my heart does this thing, and I'm just like, I need to be so proximal to you, but just life journeys, things be
it's
different.
hard and difficult. I wrote her an enormous letter a couple of months ago and was like, maybe she'll write me back one day. She's a badass. This woman is badass. Anyway, yeah, it's gotten me thinking about like categories of friends. And that was just really fun for me. I think there's also this thing of, and I feel like this is probably true of this group of people, that we all have a lot of divergent interests, right? Like, when you're talking about like your skating friends, your bar friends, or like your biking friends, all these different people. I think there's this pressure to think like we're going to find a person, whether that's a romantic person, like the one who embodies all of these different parts of ourselves. And I still, in friendship, struggle with the idea that you're describing of like, I have friends who are good for particular things, and they do not have to be friends who are good for all of the things. That's not mercenary. That's just true about people. And I'm trying to acknowledge what those different parts of myself are, and then to consider how I can still cultivate intimacy in those spaces, because I think there's been this feeling of like, I've never felt like I belong so completely to a particular subculture or group that I can have the experience that I see a lot in, say, like the convention circuit, where I see folks who are in like nerd fandom circles who find each other, and it really does not matter what their personal shit is. They're just like, I like Firefly, you like Firefly.
Yes.
I'm dating myself here, but like, we are one now. Or like people with, particular, and this happens along all different kinds of axes of identity. And I've struggled to consider like, if I am drifting peripherally through all of these communities, but never feeling like I am committed enough or central enough to any one of them to belong, what does belonging look like in a more mosaic-y kind of way?
Yeah, there's a book a friend gave me. I'm still in the consideration pool on polyamory, but the book is called More Than Two, and it, to me, honestly, is telling me a lot about just being a more independent person. And it's also making me rethink. I think about what you're saying, like re-questioning what is belonging. Like there's oh my goodness, there's just so much. I'm trying not to do the thing where I get on my soapbox and like start going on about how much I really hate social mores and like all this other crap. But there's just so much that there's a high amount of lying that happens in the neurotypical world that I didn't immediately pick up on. And so much of that builds into this idea of like almost a false belonging, or people wanting you to think that they have a certain level of relationship with someone that they don't, almost as a way to make you feel bad for not having it. And it's just like, wait, that's not really belonging. And if once again, I don't have my new definition yet, but it's definitely something that's kind of up in the air for me right now. Like I can't decide how I feel about the old definition, but I feel like maybe there's just a lot of lying in this area. People may sometimes manipulate those relationships, kind of portray them as more than they are, just as a way to like force you to feel bad for not belonging, or kind of like making you think they belong more than they do. And it's weird.
So 3 things, because we're over time, and I want to tie this with a nice little bow. So the first is, I would challenge you to find someone who's doing that and 3-2 on them and find out why they're doing that and how much fun they're having. I think that's usually the quickest way to like get that compassion space, is that like, why would someone want to win that game? And I think that'll help either pull you more into a version of the game that like you can do and feel okay with, or tell you very clearly like, oh, that person who is definitely not me is having this experience and I can now safely sort of separate from it. 2, this is everyone's homework. Ask yourself in the same way again, if you're not here and the coursework doesn't matter, I'd just go ahead. I think everyone's at least enough to, they've monkeyed around with the developmental levels enough. What does friendship mean at each developmental level? And just really explore that. And like, what does allyship mean? Basically what does both of them, allyship or friendship, mean at each developmental level? And sort of essentially, like if you were to just find out that there was a box of people who were amber blue, like what is friendship going to mean to them? If you just found that there was a room full of red people, what does friendship mean to them? Even just taking it at that level, and then starting to see, as you're building up your own definition of like belonging. I will say this, it's a little bit of a gotcha, but I don't feel bad about it, because now there's a whole container of a bunch of people who are sort of leaning towards there. We are all being kind of fast-track pulled to yellow teal. That's by design. That's what this thing is entirely made to do. My only apologies is that it can be a very lonely place. The awareness of the fact that that belonging can't just be had by horizontal association anymore puts an undue burden on the people that can have the ability to shift into these different spaces, to create spaces for their own belonging. It's not, you can't just show up anymore, which is terrible, but I don't feel bad about it, because you're doing it in a course to learn how to be an ally, and that's like the dance. But I just wanted to kind of put that disclosure on it, because that feeling ain't gonna go away. I haven't sort of solved it. The way that I have solved it in my own friendship practice is I play a lot of role-playing games. And some games I play in as a player, and some games I play in as a dungeon master, but like my feeling of intimacy, novelty, all the things that I care about in friendship, like that's one of the few containers that do it. Other than that, it's work. And other than that, it's my very close friendships where people know that like I'm gonna lead with this weird, creative, abstract energy. And a lot of my life and job has been like, how can I expand the concentric circles in a way that like benefits everyone who finds themselves accidentally on the inside of it? And that the belonging is now, how do people, it's going to be a weird languaging thing, but like, how do people more effectively belong to me than the other way around? And not like in an ownership thing, but just sort of in a, oh, the onus of belonging is now on other people, as I've sort of created these spaces and I'm home with myself, with my parts. I'm at home with people who interact with me, because I can find out ways to sort of connect with them, empathize with them, choose the degree to which I want to do. Like the more conscious things get, the less accidental relationships happen to be, which sometimes causes problems for people who have been operating accidentally. Suddenly when I get to make a choice and they can't, there's a power differential. And I get to go, bye, and they get to go, what's happening? Why is the support beam of my existence breaking? And it's like, because your support beam is a person and it can move wherever it wants to go. And that is a new game that you're essentially being invited into, that you can totally stop. But if you're going to stop now, because it's only going to get worse.
No, I don't like that idea. I don't like the idea of having to be the support beam of someone's existence. That sounds just exhausting.
It is. And it happens accidentally. I think that's the thing that's helped me giving compassion is that, just to use the language, at the amber blue level, people are their own bricks to the ziggurat of culture. And the whole point is, don't move, brick. You can't move. You're a brick. The act of enough people of those moving would break the structure, and it doesn't like that.
I miss that meme so much. I was just thinking about it the other day, and I was like, man, that was a good meme. That was like an 8-year-old meme, and it was really funny, and it just got me at the time. This is also extremely rude because it feels like very related to the questions I'm drawing up around like breakups and like having the space that I'm in right now is that I concluded a long-term relationship with somebody I care about very deeply, and we moved to like a pretty mutual space to agree to part ways in the relationship. And we've done this before. We've been together and apart for 4 years, and it was very mutual, and we were both very committed to the idea of remaining friends. And he started dating somebody new, and I couldn't hack it, and had to say like, listen, like I am committed to making this a friendship, and in order to do that, I have to take space, and I have to take my support beam away, like away. And he's just like not gonna hear from me for a while. And I was struggling with a lot of feelings of guilt and anxiety around it. Like, I am reneging on the terms of the friendship, right? That we both committed to this being a friendship. And in order to keep myself safe, I had to go. And that I'm really grateful that you articulated that as like, if your support beam is a person, that person has the right to move according to their own boundaries and what they need. And I've really been trying to remind myself this week of like, boundaries are not violence. Like maintaining your own safety is not a crime.
I can't end it on a better note than that. Closing remarks before I end this call.
Mindy, I want to hear your heart report. I feel like we've rabbited on and been really excited and talking a lot, and I also know that you're like sitting on some wisdom over there, and I want to hear it.
Oh no, you just made my heart like throb, I guess, that boundaries are not violent. I've always had this habit of befriending lonely people, and lonely people need more friends than just me. And so setting boundaries with them is always very hard. But it's always been good for them. Every time I pull away, they make more friends. They do not need me. I'm good at being this bridge friend, but I'm not good at setting boundaries sometimes. Being like,
it's okay to be a springboard.
Yeah. And they don't like the pulling away part, but it's good for them. And so sometimes I carry a lot of guilt about it. And you saying that maybe just like made my heart just like feel a lot better. Like, this is good. This is like,
and trust me, they're learning from your example. Like, I recently had someone go through an entire thing where they're like, this is my boundary and I'm going to fight for it. And I was like, cool. Like, I'm still going to fight you. And I was just like, no, it's cool. I understand. It's cool. They will learn from you, I promise.
You're the best. I just made a friend where we agreed to just schedule phone calls. And that was like such a healthy thing. like we're just going to talk quarterly and this is fine.
Way into the quarterly friendship. It's like such an underrated frequency.
Oh,
it really is.
Crap. Sorry guys, I gotta go, but I appreciate you all. Bye.
Thanks so much. See ya.
That was all for me. Sorry.
Wendell, you're muted. Return to us with your voice.
I will adjourn. That was some meaty stuff. I'm so happy that question had as much juice as I thought that it did. As you saw with all of my doing this, like, it has knocked loose some structures in my own mind. And very selfishly, that is one of the great benefits of this containers. I'm just like, what if a bunch of smart, cool people solved all my problems for me?
Let me just outsource this labor real quick to the Mechanical Turk.
I feel no remorse. So long as they benefit more than I do, or at least benefit at all.
Yeah.
That's my orange part speaking. They benefit at all. More than they paid, everything's fine.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna rewatch the other one because this has been so good.
Yeah, I really want to go back. Do you recommend, I mean, I know the ideal universe is that you watch both talks. Did you have a favorite from last weekend?
No, I couldn't possibly. Even just performatively, I couldn't
between your children.
Pick. I will say, just in general, Sundays tend to have a little bit stronger flow because, like, a lot of the workshopping happens on Saturdays. Also, just a lot less people show up on Saturdays. So they tend to be more intimate.
Interesting.
So you can kind of like, I think Saturday definitely has more of a podcast vibe. And then this
Mm.
has more of the panel discussion, but it's also the question usually is emerging out of Saturday. And then it ends up having like its full space. Like we didn't get to this question, but I just gave it as homework. This one we actually got to talk about it. So it's kind of been following that same pattern. And I'll get those uploaded because I need to get them uploaded. They're not uploaded yet.
Okay, well that's fine. Then I won't feel any rush to get in there. Yay.
Okay. All right. I will see you guys next week and in
Thank you, friends.
the Facebooks.
All right, see you around.
Thank you, fellas.